Imagine this man was caught carrying a bag with $60,000 in counterfeit money, yet they couldn't prosecute him and he walked free with ease. How did he do it? And how, in the end, was it his 15-year-old son who exposed him in the most foolish way? Welcome everyone. Today we will continue our story about Arthur Williams II, who was considered the greatest money counterfeiter in America. For those who haven't seen the first part of the story, click the link at the top of the screen. I'll also leave the link in the description box below. And now let's pick up where we left off in the previous episode. When Natalie decided she would do the first test on this paper herself. She entered one of the small supermarkets and asked for something simple for $10. She gave the cashier the $100 bill so he would give her the change, which was $90 in real money. Of course, the cashier first took out this pen and drew a line on the paper, and indeed the line came out yellow. He held the paper and turned it, and the ink indeed changed color. He held the paper up to the light and saw the watermark appearing in front of him. So he considered this bill to be real, took it, put it in the cash register, and returned $90 in real money. Natalie left the supermarket happy and excited. From the moment Arthur saw her, he knew that this money would take them to a whole new world. From then on, they started printing large amounts of counterfeit money. They were probably printing about $50,000 a month, but of course they were careful when spending the money. Even though their money was professionally counterfeited, they still had to take precautions. During the year and a half that followed, they moved from one place to another. They would print their money, spend it in a certain area, and then immediately leave and go to another area. When I say they spent their money, I don't mean they used it all up. I mean they would launder it. They would take $100, for example, and go buy something for $5 or $10 and get back $90 in real, clean money. In this way, they kept building their wealth. For young people in their 20s, this life was like a dream. They had the freedom to do whatever they wanted. They kept expanding their operation and printing more, to the point where they were sometimes printing $30,000 in one day. The situation reached a point where they didn't know what to buy with the money anymore. They had everything they wanted. So they started buying children's clothes, diapers, toys, and things like that, and then they would go to charitable institutions and donate them. They now found happiness in helping those in need. Years passed and the year 2000 came. Finally, Arthur decided to return to his hometown, Chicago. Of course, Arthur had been financially supporting his son and the mother of his child throughout the past years, but it had been years since he had seen his son, who was now 10 years old. When the young boy saw his absent father suddenly return to his life, start taking him out and buying him toys and things, the boy began to get attached to his father. Their relationship started to return to normal and grow stronger. Arthur also reconnected with his old gang, the friends he used to steal with. He immediately told them about the new business he was now involved in, and that he was printing counterfeit money. When he showed them the money, his friends were shocked. They couldn't distinguish it from real money. Of course, Arthur wasn't telling his friends about this just to make conversation. He was telling them because he wanted them to join him in the business and help him. Arthur was printing more than he could spend by far. Some of his friends had connections with large restaurants, nightclubs, and casinos, so they could distribute the counterfeit money to these places. Indeed, this money spread everywhere, and no one suspected it. Even the FBI started to notice this money. It was designed so professionally that they considered it the best counterfeit version of the dollar in the entire market. A large amount of Arthur's money was now circulating everywhere, but the amount Arthur could print was actually much larger. It became easier for him to deal with gangs. It was easier to take $100,000 of counterfeit money and sell it to a gang for $30,000 of real money than for him to go himself and try to spend it and launder it. So he started selling his money to gangs, and they would clean it and launder it. But when Arthur started dealing with gangs, he knew he had entered a dangerous world, and that he needed to be cautious and alert all the time. He was now dealing with people who could end his life in an instant if they wanted to. Russian gangs, Italian mafia, and people feared in the criminal world. Arthur was apprehensive about everything and was always watching everything around him. Any place he sat in or any room he entered, he would check with devices to make sure there were no hidden surveillance tools or microphones. For any meeting he went to, he would bring a radiation device and ask anyone he met to allow him to search them. He wasn't willing to take any risk that one of them might be wearing a listening device under their clothes. Arthur continued like this, and the year 2002 passed. One day, one of the Russian gangs he was dealing with invited him to come with them to a party. This party, of course, had all kinds of illegal substances, hashish and drugs. Arthur was also carrying what was supposed to be the counterfeit money to give to the Russian gang. This party was in a disco in one of the hotels. There were many people present who weren't part of the gang, not to mention the workers who were there. Many people noticed the hashish, drugs and illegal things. The gang had booked several rooms in the hotel, one of which was designated for Arthur. Arthur went up to his room to rest a bit, and of course he had with him the bag of counterfeit money, which contained about $60,000. He also had some hashish, a gift from his Russian friends. After about half an hour, Arthur suddenly heard a knock on the door of the room and a loud voice from behind the door saying, "Police, open the door." Apparently, one of the people who were in the disco or one of the workers had reported to the police. Arthur opened the door, and immediately after that, the police stormed the room with their weapons in hand. They started asking him where the drugs were. He told them he didn't have drugs, but there was a little hashish on the table next to the bed. The police began searching the room and of course found the bag containing the $60,000. At this point, Arthur's heart started racing. To make matters worse, one of the policemen had experience with money. Initially, the police thought this money was drug money. When the policeman took out the money and started counting it while holding the paper, he said, "I feel something wrong with the money." At this point, Arthur knew he was in trouble. He was arrested, and they took the hashish and money as evidence. Arthur thought this was the end. The police would quickly discover that this money was counterfeit, and this was of course a federal crime bigger than drug possession. When the investigation procedures began, Arthur had a lawyer. The lawyer started reading Arthur the police report. The police report stated that during the arrest the door of the room was open and that the police saw the hashish on the table next to the bed, and this was the reason that made them storm the room and search it. Arthur told the lawyer, "No, that's impossible. They couldn't have seen the hashish. The corridor is long. And it's impossible for a person standing at the door to see the table next to the bed unless he's Superman and can see through walls. Their field of vision doesn't allow them to see what's inside the room." The lawyer asked the judge to dismiss the case on the grounds that it was based on an illegal search from the beginning. The police's entry into the hotel room required either a search warrant or a convincing reason. The reason they mentioned in the report that they saw the hashish on the table and therefore entered the room was proven to be a lie, and that this was impossible. The judge indeed ruled that the case was null and void from the beginning because the search operation was illegal. Can you imagine? Arthur got out with all simplicity, even though they caught him with $60,000 in counterfeit money. Of course, after he got out, his state of fear increased 1,000 times. He was now searching everyone he met to make sure they weren't wearing a wire. He now knew that the FBI's eyes would be on him. True, he had escaped this case, but they now knew he was a money counterfeiter, or at least that he had counterfeit money, so he would definitely be under surveillance. At this point, Arthur stopped all printing activities and stopped dealing with gangs and others. Nevertheless, he remained in a constant state of panic about everything and felt he needed something new to change his life. So he began trying to track down his father, the father who had abandoned him and his mother when he was 11 years old. Indeed, after searching, he managed to find a person with his father's name living in Alaska, a place far away from them. He wrote him a letter and sent it by mail. His father responded to the letter with a call, and they talked for about an hour. After that, they decided to meet. Arthur booked a plane and traveled to Alaska. When he first saw his father, he felt great happiness. After all, this was his father. But at the same time, he felt anger inside a strange mix of emotions. He was upset about why he had left them, him and his mother, and why he had left them alone to suffer. During the days that followed, Arthur and his father kept talking and telling each other stories about their lives. His father was always apologizing and saying that at the time he abandoned him and his mother, he was in a dark stage of his life and was suffering from many psychological crises. These conversations and the give and take brought them closer to each other, and Arthur began to feel what it's like to have a father. From the closeness he felt with his father, Arthur got excited and decided to tell him about the counterfeit money he had been printing. His father listened to him and seemed very interested in the subject. Imagine not even a day had passed since this conversation when Arthur was surprised by his father coming to him and saying, "Son, I'm in a bit of a difficult situation and work has been tough lately. So if you can, maybe print me some money to fix my situation." Arthur was surprised and said, "Didn't you hear me when I told you about how I was caught and was about to go to prison?" His father said, "But son, you have a talent, and this is a blessing. One shouldn't kick away a blessing. Your father needs help, and believe me, I'll help you. We're here in a remote place that no one knows about." Arthur started thinking about it. He was scared, but at the same time he wanted to make his father proud. So Arthur decided here to start printing again for the sake of his father. The father who had abandoned him and left him and his mother to suffer from poverty and homelessness. Life is strange indeed. Arthur had hidden some paper and printing machines in a warehouse in Chicago. He asked his friends to ship the paper and equipment to Alaska. When the items arrived, Arthur and his father worked together to set up the printing workshop, preparing it for the operation. This experience brought them closer. Arthur was happy to show his father his craft and proud of the level of skill he had achieved. Working alongside his father filled him with great joy. However, since not all the necessary tools were available, the results this time weren't up to par. They weren't terrible, but the copies were of lower quality compared to what Arthur used to print before. Arthur told his father that this matter must remain secret between them and that they should test the money they printed before spending it. His father, despite not fully understanding, did everything Arthur asked. First, he informed his wife, Anise, Arthur's new stepmother after his mother's passing. He gave her $3,000 to spend and launder. Anise gave part of this money to a neighboring couple she knew, so they could also launder it. Foolishly, when they all saw the money in their hands and felt it resembled real currency, they thought, why launder it? It's impossible to tell it's counterfeit. These naive individuals started spending the money without a second thought. They didn't even try to exchange it for real money, they just spent it recklessly. Although unaware of what had transpired, sensed that his father was acting strangely. Whenever he asked about the money, his father would avoid the question and change the subject. Realizing something was amiss, Arthur decided it was time to leave Alaska. He told his father, "Dad, I feel what we're doing is wrong. I'm not comfortable printing this money anymore. I'm going to leave." His father replied, "All right, son, may God be with you. Do what makes you comfortable. I'll be here if you ever want to get in touch, of course." The father had learned the printing process and intended to continue on his own. Arthur's departure came at an opportune time. The neighboring couple who received money from Anise had been spending freely. When they tried to make a purchase at a store, the cashier immediately recognized the bills as counterfeit and called the police. The couple was arrested and recruited as informants to catch the bigger fish, the counterfeiter. Eventually, Arthur's father and Anise were arrested. The police obtained a recorded conversation with their neighbors in which they confessed to the entire counterfeiting operation. During the investigation, Anise broke down and revealed everything, including Arthur's involvement. Arthur, who had returned to his wife Natalie, was shocked when special forces raided his house. However, being cautious, he hadn't kept anything incriminating at home. The only remaining evidence was a stash of counterfeit money hidden in plastic containers buried in the woods. Despite this precaution, Arthur was arrested based on Anise's testimony. After the trial, his father received a 5-year sentence, while Arthur got 3 years. Arthur's shorter sentence was due to the fact that he wasn't caught in the act, unlike his father, who was arrested mid-operation. Arthur entered prison in 2002 and served 2.5 years. This period was one of the most difficult in his life. He was separated from his son, and his wife Natalie decided to leave him. The time in prison allowed Arthur to reflect on his life and the choices that led him there. He vowed to leave the world of crime behind forever and was eager to start a new life upon his release. However, on the day of his release, something unexpected happened. Arthur tried to improve his relationship with his son, making up for lost time. He was succeeding and their bond grew stronger. But in 2005, a well-known magazine published a major article about Arthur, dubbing him the world's greatest money counterfeiter. The article claimed Arthur had forged over $10 million. His son, reading the article in disbelief, confronted Arthur, saying it was impossible he could have forged so much. Arthur confirmed that over the years he had indeed reached and exceeded that amount. Inspired by the article and its details, his son began attempting to print money on their home computer and regular printer. When Arthur's mother discovered what her grandson was doing, she immediately called Arthur. Feeling guilty and ashamed that the Rolling Stone article had glamorized his criminal past, Arthur rushed home. He found his son printing $20 bills on their regular printer. At the time, his son was going through a difficult phase, abusing drugs like Xanax and struggling mentally. Arthur burst into the room, shouting at his son, who defiantly replied, "I can do what I want. Why is it okay for you but not for me?" Their argument escalated, with voices rising. The son, likely experiencing a drug-induced episode, grabbed a stack of the fake money he printed and ran out of the house. Arthur chased after him, and their fight continued in the street, drawing attention from passers-by. In a moment of anger, the son threw the stack of printed money at his father. Unfortunately, a police car happened to be passing by at that exact moment. Arthur, realizing the gravity of the situation, immediately dropped to the ground, trying to gather the scattered bills. When the officer asked if everything was all right, Arthur tried to downplay the situation, saying it was just a disagreement with his son. However, the officer asked for Arthur's name and filed a report. Realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, Arthur watched as more police and FBI agents arrived, cordoning off the entire street. Arthur was arrested and seated on the curb with his hands cuffed behind his back. After collecting all the evidence, they took Arthur to the FBI office. There, a senior officer confronted him about a suspicious $100 bill found in his wallet, which turned out to be one of Arthur's old counterfeits he occasionally still used. This incident closed Arthur's case. In his first prison stint, he had received a 3-year sentence because they hadn't caught him with counterfeit money. This time, with concrete evidence, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. His son, being a minor at 15, was sent to juvenile detention for a few months. They tried to get him to testify against his father, but he refused. For Arthur, returning to prison filled him with complete despair. His son briefly lived with his mother before living on his own. In the years that followed, the son spent his time counterfeiting money, though his copies were far less sophisticated than his father's essentially just scanned images. Despite this, he had many customers and worked on large orders, gradually improving his tools and methods. In 2009, when he was 18, while working on a large order, FBI agents raided his workshop. In a futile attempt to hide the evidence, he tried to close the door to the room with the printers and equipment. Of course, he was arrested, and they found a printer actively printing counterfeit bills caught red-handed. Arthur, still in prison, was heartbroken when he heard the news. He requested a transfer to the same prison as his son, which was granted a month later. During the following years, Arthur and his son became friends, spending most of their time together and making up for lost years. They talked about their future, their aspirations, and what they would do upon release. Arthur's dream became to be an artist, and he started painting even while in prison. When he was released in 2015, he began working in the art field. Most of his works reflected his life and experiences in counterfeiting. He cleverly incorporated the security features he once used in counterfeiting into his artwork, using watermarks and color-changing ink. Arthur's artworks began selling for $40,000 to $50,000 each. His life had turned 180 degrees. Instead of forging $100 bills, he was now creating single paintings worth tens of thousands of dollars. It's amazing how one can succeed when they channel their skills, art, and abilities in the right direction. And that's the end of Arthur's story. But before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. See you in the next episode.